I think it's just time for people to sort of redefine what a doctor is. If you're going to someone, while they may have been to medical school, they may seem to have your best interest, but yet all they're really doing for you is saying, here's what the test says, this is what you've got, and here's the drug. I mean, that is all that they do. And I think that is not a doctor. A doctor is someone who looks broadly at you, holistically, has an understanding of physiology, has an understanding of how all the systems work together. And I think people need to change their expectations of what a doctor is.
Welcome to the Beautifully Broken podcast, brought to you by Ampcoil. I'm your host, Freddie Kimmel, and on this show we discuss the common thread survivors share after walking through the fire, the practitioners making a difference, and the treatment modalities that deliver healing back into the hands of the people who need it most. Witness the inspiration we gain by navigating the human experience with grace, humility, and a healthy dose of mistakes. Because part of being human is being beautifully broken. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Beautifully Broken podcast. We have a very special guest today. They're always special because I bring high-level people to this group, this community, which I love to connect with so much. We have Gabe Golden, who is a documentary filmmaker, writer, and producer. He has authored 6 screenplays and has found creating documentary films to be his essential form of in-depth journalism. He really aligns with me as an artist in that way. That's why I'm so excited he's here. Inspired by his 30-year challenge with rheumatoid arthritis, Gabe is directing Lighting the Path, a documentary on alternative medicine, and has co-written and produced the award-winning Rangeland series, as well as Nevada mining series for PBS. We are so honored to have you here. Gabe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Freddie. Really appreciate being here.
Oh, of course, of course. Like I said, we've got a lot to talk about today, but what I want to do is I want to jump right in. So one question that I've been starting guests out with, if there's a superhero that you align with in your mind, who would that be?
Boy, I'm not sure that there's a superhero, but for me, my hero growing up and someone that I still look to is Bruce Lee. So he was kind of my superhero as a kid because there weren't a lot of superhero movies back then. And so I don't know if that counts, but for me, he's always been larger than life and always on another level.
Well, he is a living superhero. I mean, I remember that 1-inch punch that he would do with his hand and just fingers to chest and knock somebody across the room. That was one of my favorite things too.
Sure.
So I just want us to keep that in mind. That's Gabe's superhero. We're going to go with Bruce Lee. His inner Bruce Lee is going to be guiding us through this story. Now, if we take that superhero journey, and as a lot of them did, they unfolded. It was almost like a pain to power scenario. So I want to paint you up with this picture. You are a young kid growing up in Tahoe. And arguably for me, nature's most incredible playground. You're on a mountain bike, you're on a skateboard, you're on a snowboard, more than on your own 2 feet. Soccer, swim team, martial arts, filled with additional hours of outdoors, just the state of play. You're a kid who built his identity around his physical ability, and you're attached to it. So that's age 14. I want you to take us from that point forward.
Thank you. Yeah, that's that frames it up really well. I mean, I lived in a fairy tale land, really, in Tahoe that was just of play and opportunity. I mean, it's the ultimate place to be a kid. And so I was taking full advantage of that, particularly with the outdoors that were available. And, I just got my black belt at the age of 14. And from that point on, had about 6 months of feeling as normal and accomplished as any kid would at 14 who gets to do that. And then gradually, in a period of just a couple of weeks, I started waking up with a lot of pain in my feet, particularly. Then it came to the knees. Then it went systemic throughout my entire body. And so every joint, almost with wrist, fingers, elbows, shoulders, just swollen. So stepping on the floor as I got up out of bed was just excruciating. And suddenly we knew something very serious was wrong, but we didn't know what. So from that point on, concerned parents got me to the doctors, ended up at Stanford Medical Center, and was studied by all of their best and diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which was at least common enough back then. It was not some real mystery to figure out what I had, unlike a lot of autoimmune diseases today that are sort of covering so many different symptoms that people struggle to really get a diagnosis. But this diagnosis was dark. I was told I would probably be in a wheelchair within a few years, and that this was something that, just if it happens to you, you're going to spend the rest of your life with it.
Mm. How did your 14-year-old brain deal with that diagnosis?
I think there was a lot of denial, confusion, felt like my body was betraying me. But I never really bought into the idea of what it was, because the idea of an autoimmune disease in mainstream medicine, of course, is that your body is just turned on you. And that's just what happened. And it just happens to people, and you're going to have to live with that the rest of your life. There's no explanation. There's no real dive into why this might be happening or what might your body be doing, responding to or trying to accomplish for you. It's just, this has gone wrong, and here are a whole bunch of really powerful immunosuppressive drugs to treat the symptom.
I have a question. Did you have understanding or validation from any of your friends at that time? I mean, 14 years old, I think back to that time, and, I don't know, it's because you almost think you're invincible, right? And I didn't have a friend that was going through anything of that nature at that time, but I remembered being very focused on the state of play, and again, being outdoors like you were. What happened to that? What happened to that social interaction aspect of your life at that time?
Yeah, all of that ended because my identity changed completely. And as my identity changed, and I became vulnerable, I became very weak. I became fearful of my environment. I was afraid to be bumped into in the hallway because it might hurt or send me, into significant pain. There was no more sports. There was no more activity. And of course, nobody understands that. When they see that dramatic change in you, all they see is just, somebody who's weak. And I did my best to hide it, and tried not to, certainly didn't tell anybody about it really, maybe just my closest friends, who to some extent would understand it, but there wasn't a lot of that at 14. And I went through a phase of anger, a phase of insecurity, trying to compensate by trying to be the tough guy that I wasn't really, So, all of that faded, and I lost some friends for a while, and it was not an easy time. I isolated myself a lot.
And when did you first start to see some relief, whether it was holistic means or it was medications, possibly from a Western medicine aspect?
Yeah, so I was put on an immunosuppressant drug derived from gold called Solganol, which was a common one back then, and very toxic, obviously. But over about a 1.5 year period of doing these injections every week, having to have blood tests checked every week to make sure that my liver function was still okay, then I did notice significant improvement. And then eventually they added methotrexate to that, which is another immunosuppressant, which is still used today. And between the two of them, they managed to suppress my symptoms enough that within about 2 full years of diagnosis, so by the time I was about 16, I did achieve what they called remission. There was still pain. I was still taking pain medications most every day anyway, Aleve, which was actually called naproxen at the time. So I was getting prescription anti-inflammatories to make up for what the injections weren't doing. And from that point on, I had the ability to go back to snowboarding and skateboarding and soccer a bit, but it was on a much different level than I had known in the past. I was much more fragile.
Of course. I know that well. I know what it's like to go back to. You're trying to go back to before, and it's always different once the body's been through a trauma of that nature. So, if you couldn't timeline us through, we're at 16 now. You've returned to sports a little bit. Where is the next place we find a divergence in the road?
It's a long time. I spent the next 10 years on methotrexate, and kind of good phases and bad, where I just continued to tried to do as much as I could. I was still completely wanting to identify with a lot of the physical things that really gave my life meaning and enjoyment. But I can't complain. I didn't have it as bad as some people. The medications, I did tolerate them pretty well for quite a few years, which allowed me to ultimately to live a fairly normal life, even though I was always kind of hiding the pain and I was always taking a lot of pain medications. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I had gone to film school. I had moved to Los Angeles. I was trying to pursue film, and the symptoms continued to just get worse and worse. And they were now combined with side effects of the medications. My hair was falling out in big chunks. I had liver pain, severe fatigue, just a whole variety of symptoms. And as I went into the doctor with this concern of these side effects, as well as what I had dug up with research on maybe some alternative ways to approach this with regard to diet, maybe even a theory that infection was triggering autoimmune disease, I took that into the doctor, the rheumatologist, and he was not interested in that at all. He just wanted to up my medications, give me more cortisone. He said, we'll watch your blood work. I can appreciate you looking out for your health, but you're fine. This is just the nature of the disease.
Meanwhile, your hair is falling out and your liver's something that you're clutching while you're walking down the street. And understand that his definition of fine and your definition of fine are very different things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it was almost comical. This is just, I've seen many rheumatologists. Some are a little more open than others to this kind of stuff. But this one, it was so absurd. Even he said to me, there's a new medication coming out. It's called Enbrel. And this was one of the first biologics that they were starting to develop. Also immunosuppressant drug, not anything that's really going to heal you. He said, but there were some side effects with the initial release. They pulled it off the market, but they're gonna put it back on the market pretty soon, and we'll give that a try. And I thought, wow, so that's the best thing you've got in your toolbox is another drug that was already been pulled off the market for problems, and that's his hope. That's the only thing he's offering me. So I took my big giant folder of research and the crumpled up the prescription he'd given me. I threw it in the trash. I hobbled out of the large hospital, past the line of people at the pharmacy, and I just said, I'm done. There's got to be another way, and I vowed never to return.
So tell me about the other way. I mean, you drew a line in the sand, and where did you go from there?
Yeah, boy, I wish I could say, I just changed my diet a little bit and did some acupuncture and it was all better. Of course, it was a difficult road, but I did seek out a naturopath who was open to trying just about anything that I found credibility in my research, but also that he had found in his clinic to be effective. So we begun with he does metabolic typing, which is a variety of tests, including blood type, hair analysis, saliva analysis, evolutionary ancestry to determine the ideal metabolic type diet for you. So that was a big step in one direction for me, which of course included, even this is in the year 2002, he was advocating gluten-free, staying away from soy products because the protein was potentially the same as gluten, cleaning up the diet completely, detoxification. I did a lot of detoxification with teas and herbs, but we also implemented a low-dose antibiotic protocol. There's been a tremendous amount of research by a rheumatologist named Dr. Thomas McPherson Brown, who had done tests on minocycline for patients with rheumatoid arthritis. And he had incredible amount of research that, of course, no rheumatologist had ever showed me or seemed to be aware of. So we tried this low-dose antibiotic protocol, which was only 3 days a week of a low-dose antibiotic, in addition to diet changes. Of course, as I got off of the methotrexate and all the other medications, the side effects of those things went away quite quickly, but my immune system seemed to surge. It was like it had been suppressed for 15 years, and now it was just unleashed. And I was miserable. Every joint flared even worse. I was pretty much bedridden, could just barely get around. But it didn't take too long before I found a balance there by I think the diet changes and things were just allowing me to know that maybe I was going in the right direction. Took about 6 months total, and then I started to feel significant relief. By 9 months, I was running from my apartment to the gym, and I had a complete recovery. So, of course, I thought I had done something really remarkable and that I had beat this thing. And of course, there was a combination of anger with that as well, because I had sacrificed a lot of years, and here was another path that I'd walked and had this dramatic result. Now, this dramatic result lasted about a year, and had my life back and was pretty confident that it was going to stick around. When the pain returned in my knees, no other joints ever again, really. It was just in my knees, and it would kind of go from one knee to the next. And it was real severe, but it was just the knees. So I knew that we had accomplished something. So from that point on, the next decade was just 2 steps forward and 2 steps back of exploring all of these different modalities that might get me to the finish line.
I want to go back for 1 second. Now, there were 2 things. Now, you found space in there, you said, to pursue a film career as a documentary filmmaker in LA.
Right. I actually went to LA to film school. I studied screenwriting, film production, and acting. And when I got to LA, I was pursuing acting and screenwriting mostly. I had worked as a production assistant on some different sets, but my passion really was acting and screenwriting. Unfortunately, as the symptoms got worse, I did a lot more writing than going to auditions. Once things got really severe and I wasn't able to work for a temporary period of time, I moved out of Los Angeles home to live with my parents in Tahoe at the age of 32. So that was humbling, and so that put the brakes on that career in LA. But began a relationship with my father, who had a little bit of background in television. We had some connections with the PBS affiliate there. And so we began developing programming for the PBS affiliate in Nevada. And that began the documentary journey, as well as the desire to start filming my own journey as I went through it.
Incredible. So if I timeline that back, it was the antibiotic therapy, the low-dose antibiotic therapy that you think eliminated a majority of the RA from, it seems like, some of the bigger joints in your body and isolated it to almost just the knees.
I do believe that it was very effective. It's hard to know how effective was the antibiotic as opposed to the dramatic diet changes, detoxing the body, and a variety of herbs that I took as well that are antimicrobial. But I do believe that, what was interesting about it was that my progress followed the research almost exactly. It was like people would get on these antibiotics and would have Herxheimer's for 2-3 months, just severe flare-ups, and then they would gradually get better. And most people got significant relief. Not everybody got cured, but there was something significant happening there.
I had it's I didn't realize this until we started having this conversation, but literally, in 2001, I had moved to New York to pursue acting a month after September 11th. And I remember how stressful it was walking around the city. And, the city was in a state of chaos, and you could feel, it was palpable, the fear and this waiting for the subway. Every crash, every horn, people would jump. September 11th, I moved probably 4 weeks after the event. The city's still smoking. The sky is filled with helicopters at night. And I remember going out and looking for a job. I had very little money. And I would come home at night and I would sit in the shower and I would just literally fall down on the floor of the shower and cry because my body, I'm such an empath. And it was, I think it's the first time I realized how sensitive I was to the environment. And sure enough, it was probably like 6 weeks after living in the city, I had woke up and my fingers, my joints and knees and every joint in my body was swollen and hurt. And that's a long story that we're not going to go into, and very much the same. I tried just eating Advil for a long time, but years down the road, I also came across that antibiotic therapy by Dr. Brown. And I had tried I think it was the minocycline. There was another, actually, I think, I ended up doing the doxycycline, which was an alternative to the people who didn't tolerate that. But I remember for months I would break out in hives and just welts all over my arm. And even on like a quarter of a dose, I would have these very strange reactions to these antibiotics. And whether it was killing something and it was my body was trying to let go of it, or it was an allergic reaction, I did start to feel better after about a year and a half. But it was definitely like a transition point. It was, I definitely, that I can put that in a barrier in my mind as a wall that I broke through. And then of course, after that, I think it actually had ended up putting me in a ditch because of the damage it did to my intestine, eating antibiotics for 3 years straight. So you've got that issue. So I want to go back to our timeline here. So you've had this great jump forward. And as far as, you went from saying you were almost bedridden, moved back home with your parents, to being able to run again, and then having some isolated pain in the knees. And I have a list here of some of the things that you tried, and I want to read them. And I'd like to go down and just I want to give people perspective. So I had the list that you had delivered: various diets, vegan, fasting, paleo, ozone injections, antimicrobial herbs, supplements, IV antibiotics, acupuncture, chiropractor, NET or neuro-emotional technique, meditation, energy healing, Reiki and reconnective healing, microcurrent therapy, UVB blood therapy, vitamin IVs, earthing and grounding mats, and finally, biological medicine and somatic healing. Now that is a list.
Right, and there's probably more that I could add to that, but yeah, those are the greatest hits. Yeah.
And now, if you look at this list and say, you know what, Freddie, I know there's 2 or 3 of those that really did move the needle for me.
Well, of course, diet is such a big foundation of it, right? I mean, you do have to find what's optimal for you, what's also something that you're going to follow. And when I did my initial detoxification and I did my metabolic typing diet, the diet that was given to me was a fairly paleo diet, somewhere between ketogenic and paleo. But at the time, I was really getting into all these different gurus and listening to all of these different people. And many of them were talking that were vegan, and they were saying this is really the optimal way to heal. So I sort of did that diet without any animal proteins. And within about 4 months, I was already lean. I lost about 30 pounds of just whatever muscle I had on me. And I got weaker and weaker. My hormone levels really plummeted. Went back to my doctor that I was seeing at the time, who had initially done this metabolic typing test, and he said, "What's happening to you?" And I told him what I was doing, and he said, No. Your metabolic type is one that needs animal protein. It's how your body builds itself. He said, doesn't mean you don't need to eat a lot of vegetables. He said, but you cannot process and build your body from amino acids in just vegetables and beans the way that maybe somebody else whose metabolic type is ideal to be a vegan can. And so that was a huge lesson and a huge step when I began to incorporate animal proteins in. I began to feel much better. My hormone levels returned. And that was actually just within that range of a couple of months when I had my initial breakthrough. So that was a huge piece. And so, of course, I've refined that over the years, what I think works. But I find that really keeping it low carb and fairly paleo, a lot of really healthy fats, really works best for me. And then, yeah, there's a whole bunch of other stuff on that list. I know. And then there's so many other ones. And I'm going through this list, and I'm actually, what my eye does to this list is I see dollar signs. Yeah, you're either seeking the compassion from a naturopath who's willing to treat you at cost, or maybe for free if they're really in that position they can do that. Of course, when you're barely working, you just don't have much to give, in terms of what can you pay for. You end up going into credit card debt just to pay for treatments. And these are all exploratory, even though they are non-toxic. They may not hurt you. They don't always help. And so that journey there were things that were like microcurrent therapy, which was fairly expensive. I noticed significant results with that, but it was only if I did it really consistently 3 or 4 times a week. And that was just too expensive to do. And the machines themselves were too expensive to own.
What does that look like? What's an investment? Like, what does a microcurrent therapy cost? And can you explain it to somebody who doesn't know what it is?
Sure. I mean, it is similar to pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, PEMF therapy, which is more common now. Microcurrent, I think, though, operates a little differently in that it's sending energy through the meridians of the body to light up the mitochondria and provide extra energy. And if you target that, you can do systemic treatments. You can also do treatments that are targeted specifically on the knees. That was what I was doing. And I was noticing dramatic results of an anti-inflammatory effect. But that also was temporary because it seemed like it was just moving that inflammation for me, but it wasn't really solving the underlying problem. So, of course, a treatment would cost me $120. Machines were way too expensive to buy on my own. And you run out of money pretty quickly. But that was one that I knew seemed to have an effect.
Yeah, I know I can see how those can be cost prohibitive. So we're at this place where you've essentially eliminated everything aside from this alternating knee pain, and then you come to the Center for Biological Medicine. And you've quoted as here as saying it was some of the most effective treatments you've received on a broad scale, those things being PEMF, lymphatic drainage, hyperthermia, colonics, ozone, Zeal injections and foot baths, sound beds, and biomats. Can you speak to some of those?
Sure. I mean, what's incredible about the American Center for Biological Medicine, which is where I went for treatment, is that for a 1 week time, they would treat me every day with all of these things, and so they're hitting you pretty hard. So it is hard to know exactly what treatment may be more effective than another treatment. But the goal, of course, is just to cleanse the body and then optimize each system within the body. Biological medicine isn't about really the disease as much as it's about optimizing the performance of the body on every level. And so they really make the effort to understand what each system is doing, how they're working together, what system's the most compromised, what system has the most power. And they optimize the system that has the most power to help compensate for parts of the systems that aren't. And then they do treatments such as lymphatic drainage, for example. If your lymphatic system is congested, which almost anyone with chronic illness has a congested lymphatic system, you get this opportunity to open up a lot of channels of elimination, optimizing the liver function, optimizing kidney function, digestive function, hormones. You can cover all of these bases, and they also have really advanced diagnostics, which are measuring things that I had not had measured before.
So, and again, just for the people who don't understand, can you just explain the lymphatic system?
I could try. Sure. It's certainly the most underrated system in the body. I think it is there. You have lymphatic vessels just below the skin surface throughout your entire system, and you have many of them that are concentrated around your neck and shoulders and your armpits and your groin, where you have, and of course the digestive system around the abdomen, full of lymphatic vessels. And if those things are not moving, then that is one of the most effective ways of detoxing the body, and things can build up and it can just become like concrete in there. And especially when you have chronic illness, because movement is really the only way that you can move the lymphatic system. It doesn't have its own pump like your cardiovascular system does. So movement can be difficult when you have chronic illness. So treatments that actually help move the lymph system. There are also a variety of home things that you can do: hot and cold showers, castor oil packs, skin brushing, things like that can help move the lymph system. Once you kind of get things going, I think that's a really, like I said, underrated system that needs treatment.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to go over that list that you said, because I know, like you said, some of these treatments are incredible and they do work, but they are cost prohibitive. And there are people out there that do need an alternative. So I know you said lymphatic brushing. I know you said lymphatic drainage. That could be just jumping up and down on a rebounding trampoline that you can get off Amazon for $199. I know also an infrared sauna can be very good for moving and sweating and just starting to move. But you are really, when you're in that state of chronic disease, it's fighting that desire to live on the couch and be a nomad and seclude And really what your body wants to do, even though it doesn't feel natural, is getting out and jumping around and getting that lymphatic fluid the way it moves. Because I think, I'm pretty sure there is no pump for the lymphatic like there is the blood vessel, that it is done through rebounding, through gravity, through movement up and down off the ground.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can hopefully, if you do a lymphatic treatment or two at a clinic, I think it can be a great way to start to sort of move that sludge that might be building up. And then you can really take it on your own and do things from home and would not need to go in and, over and over again and spend a lot of money on this type of treatment. There's so many things you can do on your own too that don't cost things. It's really hard to measure in the areas of alternative medicine, the things that are most effective as far as treatments that could be very expensive, or they can be very time consuming. They can be painful. You could be traveling across town to go to a certain physician or practitioner and have something done. And how effective that really is compared to, say, a dozen things that you can do on your own that don't really cost anything, whether that's changing your diet, cleaning up your environment, all of the products that we use, having a meditation habit, or whether it's journaling, finding a creative outlet to distract you a little bit from your illness. There are certain supplements, that can be very effective. Grounding, getting outside and putting your feet on the ground. This is a pretty remarkable research on the ability of that to have anti-inflammatory effects. Getting enough sunlight, deep breathing. These are things that don't cost anything. And if you actually put into place all of those habits, how effective is that as opposed to maybe not having most of those habits in place and then sort of relying on an alternative modality or, that one practitioner or someone who's got the answer for you and spending all this money on that modality, or maybe a bunch of supplements that you're kind of attached to as you think that's what you need.
And the idea in my head is this information is for everybody. Nobody out there you don't need to wait till you have rheumatoid arthritis or an autoimmune infection, or you're dealing with diverticulitis. You can start incorporating clean water and clean living and deep breathing. And these things can happen tomorrow. Everybody can take a cold shower to reset that nervous system in the morning. And I was just talking with a friend that I did a guest teaching spot today, and I said every morning I get in the shower, and I know how good it is. A cold shower, 5 minutes is great to build norepinephrine in the brain, happy hormones, brain function goes up, the acclimation of brown adipose tissue, or the good healthy brown fat, goes up, which actually helps our energy. I look at the dial for warm, and I say, do I really want to do this morning? And then it's always a little argument. But it's a simple thing. All I've got to do is turn the dial, and I can get 5 minutes of a boost that's going to sort of biohack my system and set me in a better place for the day. And I think if you can benchmark 5 or 10 of those throughout your day, like the grounding, walking outside, maybe getting some full body sun exposure, you're going to start to feel better and better and better. And it's about the process, and it's about the journey. And I love that. I love all those examples you gave. Now, you said this basically, so biological medicine, you being at the center, which really was starting to make a big difference for you. It played out over 2 years, and you had marked down that was visiting every 3 months for 1 week, as well as doing some homeopathic remedies. Can I ask just what does that financial investment look like if somebody's looking to go down that road?
For me, it was out of reach. It wasn't something that I could afford. And I was fortunate to be able to do trade out with this center for film work. They needed a variety of film promos, educational promos. So that was how I essentially paid my way. And the investment for someone, who doesn't have that opportunity could be, $2,000 to $4,000 for a one week treatment. But when you put that in context of an entire year, let's say you go 4 times a year and you're spending $15,000 to $20,000, if you get a dramatic healing in a year, or you get significant results as opposed to co-pays and what your insurance may not cover with mainstream medicine, and while insurance covers a lot of mainstream drugs, you're still dealing with potentially thousands of dollars of expense. So that's not something that's easy to do. But again, I'm not sure that everyone needs to go down that road, in terms of that many different types of treatments all at once. I certainly encourage it if you can, because I think it's going to be your fastest route, especially when you have really good doctors who are looking so broadly at all the systems and they're looking at really advanced diagnostics. They can sort of narrow down not only what treatments you need when you're there, but what you can do on your own and what might be most effective. So, but like I said, there are other things that certain specifics within that, say it's hyperthermia or it's lymphatic drainage, that you might be able to do without having to go all the way to a biological medical center. Just kind of knowing those two might be really optimal for you. Maybe once you've had one consult with the diagnostics to get an understanding of really where you're at.
And is there a center that you would send people to in the U.S. proper? Is there a center or two that you would recommend for biological medicine specifically?
Yeah, the American Center for Biological Medicine in Scottsdale, Arizona, is where I've gone. They also have a sister clinic that they've opened in New England. So those are the two that I am most familiar with, and I would recommend certainly. So you've at least got one on the western part of the United States and the eastern part of the United States.
And do you know, from my mind, I don't, is there much of a difference between biological medicine and what someone would call, per se, a functional medicine doctor?
I think there's certainly similarities there. Biological medicine probably would claim that they're going a little further with technology. Both functional and biological medicine are looking at all systems. I think all systems of the body, or they're trying to look very holistically. Biological medicine really utilizes a lot of technology that has been pioneered, a lot of it in Germany and Sweden. So you've got diagnostics like CRT therapy, which is contact regulation thermography. They've got pulse electromagnetic field therapy, Valkion therapy, which is singlet oxygen therapy. You have ionic foot baths, you have hyperthermia, you have ozone. You start adding up all of this, and you've got a lot of weapons to use. And I think they really probably just focus more on utilizing that technology more than maybe just functional medicine.
Yeah, it's basically, again, it's like a superhero's cave if they had all their things to put them back together if they were in a horrendous fight against evil.
Right.
That's the way I look at it. And unlimited funds. So and when you're even saying those things, you know what cues up for me? I have a lot of tech in my home, because through my journey, I have looked at the figures and I've looked at the prices, and there were definitely times along the last 10 years where I've made the decision to buy some of these things. Like I have an ozone machine. I have a hypoxic breathing machine that fills up 100 bag oxygen bag, and I can do cardio on that and super oxygenate my system. I've just purchased in November, I purchased my an amp coil, which is a biofeedback, bioresonance, pulsed electromagnetic frequency device, which that's been a game changer for me in shifting the paradigm. It's one of those things that's it's put a treatment that I would, for the last 20 years, I would have definitely needed to go to a practitioner, but it's something now that it sits in my living room, and I'm super excited about it. I don't want to say too much about it because I'm 2 months in, but so far it's been pretty amazing for my journey.
I will say amp coil is something I'm familiar with. I've been very fortunate to have met or spoken with the amp coil team, and they are extraordinary people, and really there is so much heart in all of them, and you just get this sense that their mission is so authentic and genuine, that they just want to heal people, to help people, and yet the technology that's been developed is by some extraordinary people. These machines are like nothing I've ever seen. So I think amp coil may very well be a whole nother level of utilizing technology for healing, and something that can empower patients where they don't have to go to clinics, constantly, or are limited to only having this technology in places that are hard to get to. So yeah, they're an exciting company.
Yeah, it's a really is. The more I get to know the people and more the relationship builds, it becomes less about a device company and more about a community. One thing I know is I can get on 6 days a week, and I can get a hold of someone from the support team that knows the science right down to the very bones. or I can get on a community call with 100 other people that are owning it and just hear stories. These crazy stories of women with daughters who had a seizure every day for 2 months, and they go through this series of vibrational journeys, and their daughters don't have seizures anymore. Or you're having 3 or 4 members from a family that were bedridden back to work, and that's pretty much the talk, and that's what you hear from this community. So, that's just another thing to keep in mind, I think, for people as they're looking. If these stories and these experiences speak to you, there's a way for you to get better. There's a way for you to up level. You've just got to get out there and do your research. And one thing, like you did, Gabe, that was so bold is there was a time when you told your doctor to stop talking, and you went somewhere else. You went somewhere else and you started asking different questions because you were tired of the answers you were getting. And I just think that's just such a, that's the hero's journey. It took a lot of courage to do that, especially at the time when, I know now I watch the TV, a biologic that is an immune suppressant. Every commercial that's, every 8.5 minutes, you see someone running down the beach, doing cartwheels, throwing their grandchild up in the air. When I first went through my inflammatory journey, I asked for the drugs that I saw advertised because I wanted to be the person on the beach throwing the kid. I didn't want to be the person sitting in the chair feeling the pain I was feeling. And it's just not the way it is. You talk to those people in real life, and they aren't doing those techniques. They're not cartwheeling. So Gabe, I've got one more statement here from you, and you were quoted as saying rheumatologists are nothing but middlemen for the pharmaceutical companies. And I started to do some digging. And are you aware of the paybacks that some of these doctors get for the number of prescriptions per pill?
You're probably more aware of the specifics. When I begin to just get into how medical schools are funded by pharmaceutical companies and the kickbacks that I do know about, it gets so angry that I just sort of tune it out, but
yeah, no, it's just I started to get into it, and it was just so frustrating. A, it's not going after the root cause, and B, it's, we're almost plugged into the system just like the Matrix. We're feeding the machine, and I think this information isn't out there so easily, so readily available because it upsets the natural order of things that have already been put in place by the pharmaceutical industry.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's just time for people to sort of redefine what a doctor is. If you're going to someone, while they may have been to medical school and they may seem to have your best interest, but yet all they're really doing for you is saying, here's what the test says, this is what you've got, and here's the drug. That is all that they do. I've been to many, many rheumatologists, and I'll even kind of challenge them and try to get them to open their minds a bit. And there is just no acknowledgement that there's really anything else that you can do. And their only tool, after all those years of school, is just to prescribe the same drug to every single person, or maybe they prescribe, 2 of the same drug. It's just, that's all they do. And I think that is not a doctor. A doctor is someone who looks broadly at you, holistically, has an understanding of physiology, has an understanding of how all the systems work together. And I think people need to change their expectations of what a doctor is. And I think until we do that, mainstream doctors are still going to continue to just treat people the way that they do.
I couldn't agree more. Gabe, so you're working on a documentary right now called Lighting the Path. Could you tell the audience a little bit about that film and what it's going to bring forward?
Yeah, thank you. It's been a very long project. Started with me filming myself as I could in the beginning of my journey. Then as I got some progress and started to really see that there was a light in the dark in this journey, I knew there had to be other people. And as I began to encounter those people, particularly ones that I felt were really aggressively pursuing alternative medicine or other paths, I wanted to tell their stories. So we're telling several stories of people who are determined to heal, people who have walked a long journey, and hopefully as they share their insights, we are saving other people the time of having to go down the exact same path, blazing a trail that others can walk. Healing is a very individual experience. I always loved the idea that I would just get better, and then I would have this recipe and I would say, this is what worked for me, and so this is probably what works for you. There are certain universal things we can all do, and I think there's a lot of lessons in learning from other people, but your journey is going to be your journey. And most people with chronic illness, while we take a lot of steps with diet and we take a lot of steps with alternative modalities, one common thread seems to be everybody has to go within and you journey within and look at your own emotions and your past and your relationships and your state of mind and your attitude, which just to me is probably the most powerful piece that we all seem to wait till the end to explore. And I would encourage everybody to start there. Start with the power, not only of believing that you can heal, but nurturing that power and understanding what your physiology is capable of based on where you are at psychologically.
Beautiful. I'm fist pumping over here if you guys can't see it. And I would imagine that Matt Damon and Ben Affleck are not sponsoring your documentary yet.
Boy, I wish.
Well, I'm sure there's room for people that are listening to this podcast that are inspired by Gabe's story. And you should be if you're listening to this. And I know you are, but there's actually a way to reach out, and I'm sure there's a way that people can help this film move forward. Gabe?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, of course, they can go to the website and see the current trailer and donate directly to the film. The film is going to be more than just a standalone documentary. It's going to have a lot of additional extended media. So we will have extended interviews with patients, practitioners, physicians, and protocols as well. So you'll have transcripts that you can have as well. The idea is to simplify this and narrow this down as much as possible, rather than just throwing sort of a lot of ideas at people and letting them walk that path even on their own. I want to narrow this down as much as I can to what I believe and what others in the film have found is sort of the priority, the place to start, the steps to take from A to Z. I think that helps guide people, and I want to continue to. They will all be on a website that has a guide there so that people can kind of follow the path that we've walked, and then also engage and ask questions and get answers, so that people aren't just Googling at 2 a.m, with desperation in hopes that they're going to find an answer.
Well, I thank you for giving people those actionable steps, because that's always what I want, and it's never attached to those documentaries that make you scared and nervous and excited, and you need to change something. Where do I go now? And we usually go to Google, but I love that your film is going to change that paradigm. Gabe, it's an honor to have you on. I'm going to close it out. I have 2 last questions that everybody answers some incarnation of these. Are you ready?
Bring it on.
All right. Okay, so number 1, and this is a tough question. So would you trade the most painful experience of your life for easier days?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Because I know that the path I've walked has made me who I am. I know that there's a lot of quality. I know that there are a lot of qualities that I've acquired along the way, probably more compassion for other people, a desire to really help other people. That purpose has given me a lot of fuel, given me a little bit different identity than I probably would have otherwise had. I do try to look at all the positives that have come from this, but it's also not a path I would recommend just to get yourself to a greater perspective on life or to become a better person. I ultimately had to see my illness as a ladder to sort of a greater version of myself, rather than resisting the illness and trying to hide it or ignore it. Challenges, discomfort, there is growth there. We often don't want to face that, and we don't want to really dive into what the meaning is in adversity that we face. But I think that for me, that was been the most rewarding way to approach it, was that there's a light in the dark, and you need to nurture that. And ultimately from there, well, back to your question, would I trade that experience? It's tempting to, sometimes it's tempting to say yes, because I mean, who would I have been without 30 years of pain and discomfort and, financial challenges and, but these were the cards I was dealt. So, and if these are the cards you're dealt, play them the best you can rather than kind of just wishing you had a different hand.
That's beautiful. So my last question is what does it mean to you, because this is the podcast, what does it mean to you to be beautifully broken?
I think that there's beauty in adversity and in challenge, because within challenge, particularly something like a chronic illness, you are forced to go within, to evolve and grow. And a huge part of that progression is a spiritual growth. At least it has been for me. And so to be beautifully broken to me means to find meaning in that challenge or in that adversity. You have that choice. You can resist it and say why me and not really dive into it. But I think there's a much bigger, broader meaning in the things that we face. And ultimately there's a beauty and a progress and a growth that we will get from walking that path with the intention of finding meaning in it. And I think there's really no other way to do it that's going to result in a healing without doing it that way.
Gabe, thank you so much. A heartfelt thank you. You've led the path. Not only that, but you're documenting it. You're leading by example. And I know there's people that are going to listen to this episode. They're going to be inspired. Can you give us one more time the website where your documentary lives?
Yes, thank you. It's goldenfilmproductions.com.
Gabe Golden, you are the perfect example of Beautifully Broken. My friends, this episode of the Beautifully Broken podcast was brought to you by our sponsor, Ampcoil. Thank you guys for tuning in. Now, if you enjoyed today's show, head over to iTunes or Spotify or Ready Set Go, and you can leave a review, and you can grab a download, and you can subscribe. When you do that to this podcast, when you leave us a 5-star review, you help spread the message, and you help more people connect with this content. Now, if you want to connect with me, shoot me a message on Instagram at Ready Set Go, and you can send me a request for a topic or a guest or somebody you want to hear interviewed on the show. My friends, that's it for today. Our closing: the world is hurting, and we need you at your very best. So take the steps today to always be upgrading. And remember, when life is pain, that can be a fact. Putting the fractured pieces back together is a beautiful process. I'm your host, Freddie Kimmel. This is the Beautifully Broken podcast. Namaste.